English translation 632nd contact Thursday, the 22nd of October 2015, 14:31 hours.
I was in the kitchen a minute ago when you called. Greetings and welcome.
Greetings, my friend. Why did you have Florina call me so badly?
When you left on the 29th of September and I called you back again to ask you about the status of the clarifications concerning. You said that you would visit me before mid-October this month and let me know and possibly give me a proposal for a solution. But now it's the 22nd of October, so I called Florina and asked her if she could ask you if you could come today, tomorrow, or the day after tomorrow, because it's starting to cause problems.
That's why. Unfortunately, it was not possible for me to come earlier. But since I have the time today, I will of course come to inform you about the result of our clarification. So over the last 3 years, it has become clear that the times during which
Purely core group internal issues.
that is of correctness, but as I have said, exceptions may have to be considered. You also have to decide on this together in the group, as of course also with regard to what has now been discussed.
That's fine, because there's no other way. The problems are solved by this, so that it can no longer happen that someone is drawn to duties during their holidays.
Is that what happened?
Yes, on official working leave, and as a substitute.
That should not have been the case, because it does not correspond to what may and must be. If the employer gives a holiday, then this must not be shortened or otherwise impaired in any way by FIGU fulfillment of obligations. This is inevitably given by the fact that the work securing the livelihood stands before every FIGU fulfillment of duty. Logically follows that all further factors connected with the work of any kind are to be handled equally.
The substitutes have to be kept one way or the other, because there is no other way.
That is not of correctness.
I am afraid we did not think of that.
That is unfortunate. Then it must be fixed by a failure, whereby the correct way must be that the substitute person is left out at the next substitute rotation.
But it has already happened, so it must be ironed out. But I would like to say the following to you.
It is understandable, but
Well then
this is of correctness.
it shall apply. But what about the fact that duties such as can be exchanged during holidays?
This is of the right, because in this way there is no breach of resolution, but a rule proposed by me, which was also unanimously approved, accepted, and adopted by all core group members. The fact, however, that a member is involved in a duty during the time of his holiday, such as in the night watch, is unjust and violates the stipulation and rule that everything that is to be associated with work must also be handled as such, which is also to be understood in relation to holiday. If prior to a leave of absence from work, the holiday makers make commitments by their own decision for duties in the center, this must also be noted in writing by the executive board. However, mandatory assignments during holiday periods cannot be valid if a member is to be included in the fulfillment. Mandatory assignments during holiday periods cannot be valid if a member is to be included in the fulfillment of duties only after the start of the holiday, if these have not been confirmed before the holiday and have not been recorded in writing.
That is clear, but if I may again address the security in the center, then I want to say that here and there, not everything can be kept under precise control, both during the day and at night. Often strangers appear who want to inform themselves or buy books and then simply walk into the house without ringing the bell.
I have known about this for a long time, which is why I've often wanted to draw your attention to the fact that you should lock the center all around. But I've always forgotten this due to the things that had to be discussed.
We will arrange and adhere to this in the future. And if we have nothing else to say about all this, then I want to say something else.
What is said and explained should suffice, so that you can speak of something else.
Well then, look here, Achim Wolf asks me this.
In view of the current streams of refugees and migrations of millions of people from Muslim-influenced countries, one wonders in Germany and Europe what this will lead to in the coming years and decades. Many fear a threatening Islamization of Europe, and even that, at some point, the Sharia, that is to say, the totality of laws that have to be observed and fulfilled in an Islamic society, could be introduced. This would mean, for example, that one day all women in Europe would have to wear a burqa or a chador in public. Perhaps it could also happen that the Figu is not allowed to distribute its writings for a while because they are not in conformity with the Sharia, etc. 1. Are there any prophecies, predictions, or calculations of probability from you or the Playaran? 2. What can we expect with regard to the threat of the Islamist State in this respect? 3. Are the current joint efforts of Russia and the USA sufficient to combat the IS? Best regards and all the best for you, as well as a heartfelt thank you for all your work, and that of the core group and all the people who fight for peace. Kim.
If you know something about the question and can answer it, I'd like to hear what you have to say about it.
I, too, deal with earthly concerns in this regard, as well as with making probability calculations with regard to one and the other facts, but not in order to make predictions or prophecies. With regard to the question whether an Islamization in Europe, or even sometime the introduction of the Sharia, is to be feared, it can be said that this will not be the case, because the European coinage of mentality and religiosity is too strong to be overgrown by Islam. Surely women in Europe do not have to wear a burqa or a chador, nor do they have to wear the fact that Figu books and writings should not be distributed because they do not conform to Sharia law. The Figu books and writings in no way denigrate Islam, but are in conformity with the teachings of Muhammad, which he taught in the form of the and goblet of the truth, and with the teaching of the truth, teaching of the spirit, teaching of the life. Unfortunately, however, his teaching is not truly preserved and handed down in the form in which he taught it, which is why it is now directly recorded and taught in writing for all the future. In this way, falsifications can no longer occur, because the teaching is taught directly in writing in books, articles, brochures, and small scripts, without falsification, in the original word. In former times, all technical possibilities were lacking for this. Consequently, the doctrine was from time immemorial only taught orally by the proclaimers, whereas for the experts of Scripture, it was the task to write down the offered doctrine, which however always led to great falsifications, because the proclaimers of Scripture interpreted and falsified the scientist according to their own discretion. Consequently, only very little of the real doctrine remained reasonably analogous and was handed down to the present day. Well, also with regard to the question of whether people in Europe will turn to Islam in the future. It can be said that this will not be the case, even if European religious and sect aberrations turn to Islam, as is unfortunately always the case with so-called God-seekers and God-believers, because they are deluded into believing that the God of another religion or sect, as well as the teachings and ritual acts and regulations, are better, fairer, and more humane, etc. But there are other confused and delusional misconceptions as well. As far as the threat of the Islamist State is concerned, it is very great because it is constantly increasing because of the refugee system, namely because Islamist sleepers, and thus murderous adventurers and fanatics, are uncontrollably smuggled into Europe and other states, where they can then bring their deadly mischief to bear. And the fact that this can happen in Europe, I have no choice but to say this, is due to the stupidity, hatred, revenge, and boundless irresponsibility of German Chancellor Angela Merkel, who paved the way for this human catastrophe. This is a fact that causes both the German people and the peoples of the states of the dictatorial European Union to revolt and provokes malignant unrest, which may lead to civil war-like uprisings, for which not much is lacking according to the current state of the refugee disaster. On the one hand, and on the other hand, various states of the European Union are forced, for the good of their own country and its people, to take drastic, violent countermeasures, be it, as it has been done for weeks, by erecting border fences and keeping refugees from entering the country, or be it by direct use of force with regard to the refugees. And with regard to the refugees, it should also be mentioned that our extensive investigations have shown that the majority of all refugees are not real refugees, to the detriment of the real refugees, but leave their homeland only because, through the propaganda via public media, that all refugees are welcome in Germany and Europe and are cared for in every good way. All the people are tempted by Angela Merkel to flee their country and flee to Europe, to be cared for by the state in every imaginable way, cared for and, if desired, provided with all luxury goods. We know this by listening to many conversations of the so-called refugees, who in their naivety believe the lies and false promises of Angela Merkel, who wants to ruin Germany, as it is also in the interest of other power-hungry people in the EU government. But the German people know nothing of the fact that their country will be shamefully betrayed in this way and will be pushed off the pedestal. That must still be said. And as far as the IS is concerned now, it is presently and also in the near future very questionable whether it will be possible that the Islamist State can be finally dissolved by the USA and its allies as well as by the Russians, as is also the case with other fanatical terrorist organizations, criminal syndicates, and their followers. In this regard, one has to think, for example, of the Nazi system, from which the almost worldwide neo-Nazitum has developed, as well as of the U.S. Ku Klux Klan, the Sicilian Italian, American and Russian Mafia, the Japanese Yakuza and Al-Qaeda, etc., which have existed for many decades and which the law, the police, the security forces, and the military cannot control and dissolve these organizations. These are the facts, how I see and understand them, and how I have worked them out from my probability calculations.
Thank you. I'll take care of it. Your calculations are consistent with this, as well as Ptah and I assess and see everything. As far as the sleepers are concerned in relation to the Islamic State and the threatening consequences of the refugee disaster, our opinions also correspond equally. But what I would like to say about the burqa and chador question, there is also the headscarf among Islamic women, about which many people in Europe get stupidly upset, which I cannot understand because the headscarf is nothing reprehensible. Even today, various European women still wear headscarves in the countryside. Such as peasant women, as was common a few decades ago with other women in Europe, who protected their hair and head with a headscarf from the sun and dust, and prevented their hair from falling into their face all the time at work. This was common throughout Europe, and no one lamented because it was the most natural thing in the world for women to wear headscarves.
This is correct, but today, as the Christian world is largely afraid of Islam for reasons of terror and foreign faith, the traditional practical wearing of headscarves by European women is forgotten, and the religious wearing of headscarves by Islamic women is outlawed. The reason for this, however, is not to be found in women, but fundamentally in men, who interfere in the concerns of women and design and determine their clothing.
The principle of the headscarf demonization is just the xenophobia and racial hatred, as well as the religious denigration and the ignorance, as it has been given since time immemorial, mainly with very many men by their xenophobia, up to the bottomless hatred, which leads up to the murder. But the word also applies. If two do the same thing, then it is not the same thing. Already as a boy I noticed and witnessed this again and again with men, just as they discriminated against foreigners or simply foreigners with bad insults, as is still the case today. This in contrast to women, with whom I did not observe this tendency or only rarely, and if they did, then they simply imitated the men and still do today. I remember very well that in my youth, due to the hatred of foreigners, etc., the Italians who came to work in Switzerland as seasonal workers were called Sautschingen, and as a result of the war, the Germans were generally called Sauschwaben. But the stupid people or those from this people who use these insults maliciously did not even know in their stupidity regarding the insult word chingen that this was derived from the boccia game, namely from the number 5 or Italian cinque, and that only the Swabians from the administrative district of Swabia are effectively Swabians, but not all other people from the German federal states. Apparently all those fools did not know that either, who insulted all Germans as so Swabians, and still do that today, as I hear from old Swiss people again and again. Also the term Kanaken or Kanaker, which has come up especially in Germany and Switzerland for the Turks, is maliciously used by many stupid people as an insult word, because they do not know in their stupidity that the word Kanake or Kanaka basically means man, in the language of the Kanaken, a people in New Caledonia, which formerly stood under France's colonial power. The numerous immigrants are also called Kanak or Kanak by the French. These Melanese New Caledonian natives are therefore native to the Southwest Pacific, accounting for 45% of New Caledonia's population. The word originates from a Hawaiian term for man, namely the term Kanaka is derived from Kanaka Maoli. In the past, the term was often used for all non-European islanders by European explorers, traders, and missionaries who flooded Oceania with Christianity, causing much disaster there as well. Before Oceania was discovered by the Europeans, there was no United State in New Caledonia, and therefore no comprehensive self-designation for the inhabitants. Even today, about 25% of the canoes in the various tribal areas still speak their Kanak languages, as they still devote themselves to their own customs and traditions. Well, back to xenophobia, and thus also to hostility to otherness as well as religious and cultural alienation, which in fact still prevail today among many men in Europe, as well as among women, who in recent times have increasingly joined the male world in this respect. And that is something that also proves itself through protest speeches, protest actions and posters, etc., directed against foreigners, dissenters, dissimilar cultures as well as lesbians and homosexual men. It is therefore a fact that the discriminatory elements of both sexes, which have been discriminating in this way for decades, are becoming more and more talked about. And this is done in this way by political parties as well as by the military, security forces, terrorist groups, civil servants, and religiously sectarian fanatics. And I think that in this respect one can probably list each population of a country in equal percentages.
What you say is also correct, and I find that very interesting in relation to Kanak and Kanaken, because I was not aware of anything in this respect. But now, my friend, I must return to the fulfillment of my duties when...
Sorry, that means if when I don't have a question or anything. But that is exactly what I have got. I am trying to tell you something interesting. Last Friday, it was the 16th, when I looked out of the kitchen window at 2035 HRS, I saw a wolf passing by. And it was undoubtedly a wolf, as I could see in the court lamplight. I know wolves well enough because I have seen quite a number of them on my roller. Erhard was sitting in the kitchen at that time and said that he heard the animal when it sounded behind or below the house, presumably in the ravine or behind the Russian caravan. When I then shared my observation with the group members at the meeting on Saturday, some obviously thought that I would fib, but I didn't care, because I knew what I had seen. Later, Silvano brought a wild camera behind the garden, and what could be seen on it? Just the same wolf I could see running over the cesspool concrete floor behind the kitchen.
Interesting, but somehow I can understand that there were some doubters, because the center area and the Tostal region are not hunting grounds for wolves. But now farewell and goodbye, because I really have to go.
Then goodbye and Salome too. Bye.